Welcome to the Lift Oneself podcast, where we break mental health stigmas through conversations. I'm your host, Nat Nat, and we dive into topics about trauma and how it impacts the nervous system. Yet we don't just leave you there. We share insights and tools of self-care, meditation, and growth that help you be curious about your own biology. Your presence matters. Please like and subscribe to our podcast. Help our community grow. Let's get into this. Oh, and please remember to be kind to yourself. Welcome to the Lift Oneself podcast. I'm your host, Nat Nat, and today I have an amazing guest that we're going to get into a very spicy topic that some people might be able to relate to. Some people might just be like, I think I'm going to go to the next episode. Whatever is needed is needed. Yet I think it's a topic that needs to be discussed so that we can start creating some change and some dialogue around it. So, Logan, would you do us the honors to introduce yourself and let us know a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm Logan Hufford, and I'm up here in Alaska. It's always cool to do a podcast with somebody, kind of in the same spectrum, closer to the Arctic Circle than it is to the equator, even if different countries, right? I don't know how to introduce myself other than just to give a little glimpse into my story, which is I'm here talking to you because I absolutely have been given a new lease on life when it comes to mental health and addiction and being trapped in bondage and not knowing how to ever be free from that, or if I even could be freed from that. And so the last 8+ years has been a continual journey of recovery for me. And this year specifically, I started, going on a little bit of a broader mission to reach folks through podcasts and social media and talk about sexual addiction awareness.
So, as you heard, listeners, we're going to get into the sexual addiction. So, for some, that's maybe a trigger. For others, it's just not a topic that they really want to be engaged in. So, you know what? As I always say, take care of yourself. And at any time in this conversation, if there's things that made you feel out of sorts or anything, pause the podcast. Take a moment to process, take the time for yourself and unpause it, come back to it. It could be a couple of days after, or it could be just a couple of minutes, whatever is needed for you. So again, this whole intention of this podcast is about removing the stigma around mental health and sexual addiction. Unfortunately, a lot of people are afraid to start engaging and talking about it, where I think it's very healthy to speak about sex and what it can do with our mind and what we can do with our wounds to try to cope. And by going in such an addiction in that aspect, rather than being able to, feel authentically what our emotions are. Because addiction in its simple form is avoidance of pain. And what does sex do? Sex brings pleasure. So the two in itself, it's really to unpack to better understand and not have a black and white thinking. So Logan, I'm very thankful that you're here to bless the listeners with your experience, your information, and that we can engage in this conversation that's needed right now, and especially for the younger generation, that those parents that are listening, that they can have a dialogue with their children and stuff, because now with technology, there's all kinds of things that are accessible to children that in my generation you had to go to a store or something like
Oh yeah.
that, but now it's just at their fingertips in their bedrooms. So before we get into this highly charged conversation, would you join me in a mindful moment so that we can ground ourselves and connect in our hearts? And as you know, the listeners, safety first. I'm going to ask Logan and myself to close our eyes. Yet most of you are probably driving or running, so you need your eyes open. So safety first, please. Yet the other prompts you're able to follow with us. So Logan, I'm going to ask you to get comfortable in your seating. And if it's safe for you, gently close your eyes. And you're going to begin breathing in and out through your nose. And you're going to bring your awareness to watching your breath go in and out. You're not going to try and control your breath. You're just going to be aware of its rhythm, allowing it to guide you in your body. There may be some sensations or feelings coming up, and that's okay. Let them come up. You're safe to feel. You're safe to let go. Surrender the need to control. Release the need to resist and just be. Be with your breaths. Drop into your body. Now, there may be thoughts or to-do lists that have popped up in your mind, and that's okay. Gently bring your awareness back to your breath, creating space between the awareness and the thoughts, and dropping deeper into your body, keeping that awareness on your breath and allowing yourself to just be. Again, more thoughts may have popped up. Bring your awareness to your breath, beginning again, creating even more space between the awareness and the thoughts, and dropping even deeper into the body, allowing yourself to be with the breath. Just keeping your awareness on your breath. Keeping that awareness with your breath. Now, at your own time and at your own pace, you're going to gently open your eyes while staying with the breath. How's your heart doing?
Good.
I want to ask, how did the journey begin with the sexual addiction?
Yeah. And I am going to give just a quick little, I co-sign with everything you said to your audience. And then I will just add this little piece, especially as you just said, um, everyone listening, to take care of themselves and knowing themselves and their past and their triggers. But here is how I go through every podcast interview I've ever done. When I'm talking about recovery, talking about sexual addiction, I talk about it in such a way that if somebody has a 11, 12, 13-year-old kid in the car with them, if you are ready to have an honest, vulnerable conversation with that child, I'm not going to tell you to listen, but I would caution you, don't necessarily change it just because we're talking about sex, because I can promise you they are hearing about sex. So I would invite you to consider listening to this episode, because I'm not going to, as we talked about, I'm not going to share explicit stuff. I'm not here to sensationalize anything. I'm here to talk about what it is to struggle, to feel hopeless, and now to live in hope ultimately. And yeah, my specific addiction was a very dark one, and it involved chasing after the highs that came from sexual behavior. But yeah, I'm not here to get gross and get weird. That's not what I do. So in fact, one of my interviews, this was more of a family overall focused episode. It was actually a part two. So it was talking about kind of how my wife and I parent through the lens of recovery. But there's plenty of stuff for our story and stuff like that. And my oldest, he's 12, he listened to it, and he was mentioning some things afterwards later, which kind of gave me a kick, because he knows our story anyway. But um my story with sexual addiction started off honestly in like maybe the most innocent way somebody could ever imagine. And I mean that in a couple different ways. Because number one, so I'm the baby of five. I was raised in a family where I had both my parents raising me, four older siblings who, there's no perfect family, but four older siblings who generally got along well. They loved me. I felt cared for. I felt safe. I never felt unsafe in my home. I did not grow up in an abusive, traumatic household. I did not grow up with some, acute tragedy event. Like, I had a very safe and comfortable upbringing. Like, we weren't spoiled, but like I had my needs taken care of, physically and emotionally, generally speaking. And even the introduction of pornography and sexuality. Here was my introduction to pornography. I call it my introduction to pornography, but it wasn't porn. It was me as maybe 10 years old. That's kind of the arbitrary number I picked out, because it was definitely way before. I didn't, pre-puberty, I didn't know how sex worked, anything like that. And I found in the once a year JCPenney catalog, this giant catalog, that in the middle of that, there was a section where I could find lingerie models and swimwear models. So this was not an inherently sexual thing. This was not a pornographic thing, but it was me. It was the first time I sexually objectified images of women and got a feeling out of that. And I didn't know what that feeling was. I didn't know any, didn't understand dopamine or anything like this. But I knew I liked how I felt. I felt that charge. I felt that rush. So literally that was the start for me. And there was no Playboy magazine, as you alluded to. I mean, there definitely there were no devices around. This would have been late 90s. Like we had dial-up internet, but that wasn't something that I could just hop on real quick and float around the internet. So that's where it started. I didn't need some crazy event, to trigger this addiction. I definitely didn't get pushed into it. I enjoyed how I felt, and I wanted to chase after those feelings. And it was kind of especially considering what my addiction looked like 10 years later, 12, 13 years later, it was a slow burn. I mean, it took me several years before I was regularly looking at hardcore videos, and involving masturbation with that and that kind of thing. That was like the next level, the next step. But it was a slow burn of chasing after these highs. And then it wasn't until I was 18, 19 years old that I started, let me chase after this feeling with real women. As a kid, even as a teenager, I was never a shy person, but I was a shy kid around girls my age, because I felt ugly and I didn't think the girls would like me. And so I was definitely shy around my peers, especially if they were girls. So I didn't try to, flirt and seek out attention and try things physically for a long time, because I was afraid of rejection. I was afraid of looking foolish and all these things. But once I started crossing over those barriers, I mean, then it was like a dam. And then things started getting very progressive very fast.
What was the breaking point for you?
Okay, when you say breaking point, I think I understand what you mean, but
Yeah, I'll elaborate.
yeah.
When I say breaking point, when is it that you realized it was an issue that you no longer had control over and you knew that you had to do something about it?
Yeah. Yeah, because in a way there's kind of like a couple, maybe there's a lot more than two, but there's kind of a couple different breaking points that I could look at, where things really started to break in various ways. The first one really, I would say, would be 6 months after I was married, 6 months after we said I do. When we got married, June 4th, 2011, we were young. I was 20, my wife was 21. I had already cheated on her multiple times. Not just with pornography, secret porn use, but also with real women. I already cheated on her multiple times, and I felt terrible. I felt shame. I hated that I did those things, but I still I was still kind of able to believe the lie that, well, yeah, this is terrible, but almost like a 6 month, bachelor trip, kind of looking at like, oh, this was terrible, but like I won't do that once I'm married. This was terrible, but once I'm a husband and I'll be a dad, like of course I'm not going to do that stuff. So I still could believe this stupid lie that I'll just clean it up and I'll just flip the switch off. That's not how human behavior works. Once I've trained myself to chase after something and I get that reward, which ultimately chemically that's what we're talking about here, that there's no just off button. But I got married, and then it didn't stop. I hired a prostitute within the first year of my marriage. Continued. I was a car salesman. I was good at my job, not because I was the best salesperson in terms of sales techniques or because I knew the most about cars. I was good at connecting with people and building rapport. And that's not a bad thing, but I absolutely abused that when it came to most women that were in my path. I would chase after whatever I could get, flirting or a text response. If I could get something physical, whatever I could take, I took. And so 6 months after we got married, I felt so bad from all of this, and I did feel bad. And so I wrote a letter to my wife. And this was the first time that I confessed all this. This was the first time that anything other than she knew I struggled with porn, anything else was confessed. And I don't remember exactly, like, I don't remember word for word what I put in it, but I did say, that I had had affairs. And in my head, here's another stupid lie. I thought I was done. I thought, oh, I felt so bad. And I vomited onto this sheet of paper. Looking back on it, I also vomited onto my wife, because it made me feel better to confess it. Certainly didn't make her feel better, and there was no changed behavior on my end. Um, but I would say, around that time is the first time that I really seriously saw, okay, there's an issue here. Like I'm married to this beautiful woman who is doing everything she can to be an incredible wife, and I'm not stopping. In fact, it's only getting worse. There wasn't like a singular moment where I had that realization, but I mean, ultimately, that's why I wrote the letter, is because I did feel so bad, and there was fear there, and I thought the letter, her knowing about it, that'll be the push I need to not do it anymore. And it didn't work because I didn't change my infrastructure, I didn't change my routines, I didn't change how I approached life. Things I did, the people I hung out with, none of that changed. I just hoped that I would stop doing the bad thing.
Yeah. Do you think if your wife would have left, it would have been something different?
Well, for sure, for sure. Um, I guess again, I'll ask you if you can expand a little bit, and we say something different.
How I'm hearing the story is okay, you confessed something. She had a big reaction, but she didn't leave.
Right,
So in our biology, in our, the way addiction works, well, you're kind of giving me permission to continue because you're not leaving. There's no real consequence to this.
right,
And so in that, not seeing that she's doing forgiveness and wants to work with you, the addiction is still overpowering of not seeing the appreciation and gratitude and actually do that inner work. A lot of people may not understand the way addiction is so insidious in our mind. The way the nervous system can trick you with certain things and the way that people show up with us. Because when you've finally said, okay, I did something and asked for forgiveness, but they still stay, if you don't take really the accountability, it gives a messaging that it's okay to continue with this because the cat's out of the bag and there wasn't really any consequence. Was
right.
that something that you looked at or that you felt or that you were aware of?
Yeah, I mean, I would completely agree. And of course, like, those are terrible words to say, that like there was sort of a permission being granted, like, and I
Or let's
not
use
to,
manipulation
but
because it's
ultimately, like, that truly is, that's how I felt. Obviously, that's not what my wife was trying to do,
Mhm.
but that is truly, like, that's kind of what I took from it, is not that I had permission, but I was free from her consequences. I was free from my marital consequences, right? And ultimately, that, I mean, that's how I approached so much of this. I never got an STD. Now, I didn't get tested for several years. So I mean, I'm not an STD expert. I don't know what, if there's certain things that could have come and gone. But there was no evidence of ever having an STD. When I did get tested, everything was negative. Like, I just assumed that would happen. I just assumed, well, I'm playing it safe this way and that way. When I started hiring prostitutes, I remember having the thought of, like, what if there, what if this is a sting operation, or like, what if this, or what if that? And I can play in the fire, and I'll know when to jump out. I mean, that's how I have gone through life. That's how I went through life for the first 2.5 decades, when it came to how I drove my car, my finances, other addictions. I had huge gambling addiction. I mean, all this stuff was just wrapped up into this. I can play in the fire, and I will know the exact moment when to jump out, and not to get hurt too bad. And the reason why I wanted to do clarification, but at the same time I was nodding my head, is like, yeah, it certainly would have been different. Now, here, I don't play the, like, what if game very
yeah, yeah.
much,
No,
but
it's
I
not.
mean, but here's what I think probably would have happened if Carrie would have left me. especially like, let's say if she left me, if I confessed you know, if I wrote that letter a month after we got married, like, hey, I'm so sorry, but I cheated on you multiple times before, and she left me, right? Full grounds to leave me. If she had done that, um, things would have been drastically different on a practical sense because now I'm no longer married and now we don't have these kids. I think I absolutely would have just continued down this track and probably just gotten, it would have just been even more extreme. I think there's a chance that the pain of that might have, maybe I would have, been so broken that I would have sought help, but I don't know because,
Mhm.
and not to jump too far ahead, but I mean, the whole reason why I jumped into recovery, it wasn't really to like heal myself because I didn't think that was possible. I was trying to maybe keep my marriage together. I didn't think that I would ever heal, not at the start, but I was willing to do some things. Um, so, and like to anyone listening, please understand everything that I've shared to this point, and even some of the stuff that will come up later. This is all descriptive. Most of this is not prescriptive. Like my wife absolutely had every right to leave me, and it wasn't wrong for her not to leave me, but it would not have been wrong for her to leave me and to state very clearly, hey, you broke these. Like this is why I'm leaving. So I always just want to make sure I'm putting that out there. This is not the advice section.
Yeah, yeah, of course. It's sharing what the story is, and everybody has the power of choice and how they're gonna, live life and what they're gonna engage in. And your wife did a lot of warrior work to be able to engage in that and still stay with the commitment. Now, when you're speaking and you said that you did the recovery for something outside of yourself, it wasn't for anything inside of yourself. It was like the marriage that you're trying to help, and um that you didn't feel that there was any possibility of healing within yourself.
I didn't think it was likely. I didn't think it was likely.
Do you now today, do you recognize that that was because you were not in your worth?
That's a way to put that. Um, Very much so. I mean, yeah, there's so much um this giant, I guess the Shrek thing, the giant onion with all these layers, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, I viewed myself as a completely a worthless, dried up husk of a person. That was all I was doing was I was like a bear trap sitting out there that every once in a while just snap and break somebody's bone. Like that. That's what I was. That's what I felt about myself. Um, I routinely would just wallow in how much I hated the fact that my kids had me for a dad, that Carrie had me for a husband. And yet, like that pain, that desperation, that didn't equate to me stopping the behavior.
Mhm.
Because that's addiction is a really powerful thing. I always have choice, and I love that you said that there is the power of choice. And I will always emphasize that so people don't get the wrong idea about addiction. It doesn't mean that I'm not responsible for my choices, but it does mean that there's more, I'm operating more and more on my limbic system and defense mechanisms. And this happens, so I do this. And I've got to figure out how to slow down and be able to make the right choice, the moral choice, that instead of just the limbic choice. I'm getting off topic here.
No, but no, you're not. It's exactly what this is, and it's feeling. When we're impulsive and we're trying to do the hot potato offload, you're just jumping out of your skin because it doesn't feel good to be in your body.
Yeah.
We haven't created enough, and especially for men, boys don't cry. So any kind of feeling of vulnerability and sensitivity coming up, I'm going to armor and just offload this rather than, like you said, explaining it so well, slowing it down. And the slowing down is let me feel what's going on internally rather than just going with the defensive mechanisms. Addiction is protecting you. I know people may be like, what the heck are you talking about? To not be in your worth is very painful. You othered yourself out of existence. And so to be in that unsafety, that's a deep pain. So anything that would give you some sense of thrill. And as you explained, the impulsivity of driving and finances, it was like, oh, you're addicted to adrenaline.
Right.
Adrenaline gives us a really good rush. It's a really
When,
good high. And
when
then
you
when
say,
you
okay,
go ahead.
when you say, I mean, addiction, the protection of addiction. Here's, I mean, I speak in I statements for two reasons. Number one, quite honestly, because that's in my recovery program, that was a must. If
Yeah.
I start throwing out a bunch of yous and we's and thems and
Yeah.
those people, or that, it's like I'm gonna get I'm
You're
I'm gonna catch some heat real fast.
you're not in
But
power.
but then the other part is, I recognize like there are some truths here. There are some absolute fundamental truths. Um, it's not all just my opinion, but when it's my story, my experience, I recognize that not everything is going to be the same for everyone. So here, my addiction in terms of my protection, I use the word exoskeleton. It was an exoskeleton
Mhm.
that I didn't intentionally create. I didn't pick it like I was in a video game trying to pick my, you know, but it's something that formed over the course of time, over the course of a lot of bad choices, but it was, and so like there was this feeling of the cocoon, the protection, but it was also, of course, it was sucking my soul, right? And
Mhm.
it was hurting. It was toxic to everyone else. It was toxic to me, but it was an exoskeleton and it was attached to me.
Mhm.
And so if anyone can imagine walking around with a literal exoskeleton, like a crustacean, that is simultaneously poisoning you and poisoning those around you, but it is attached to you.
Mhm.
So, yeah, eventually in recovery, I mean, I got to a point where there was the ability to have that removed,
Mhm.
but it wasn't taking off a hoodie. It wasn't taking off a winter coat. It was having this thing that was embedded in me very deeply, ripped out. And it wasn't going to be quick. It wasn't going to be easy. And it definitely was not going to be painless. Um, and going back to that earlier thing of, I didn't get in recovery to remove that exoskeleton. I didn't even know I had an exoskeleton. But I'm so thankful that it was removed, even though, yeah, it did mean that for a while there, that first year or so in going through recovery without my exoskeleton, life hurt a little bit more,
Mhm.
sometimes a lot bit more,
A lot more. A
because
lot
I'm
more.
I'm raw, right?
Yeah.
I'm vulnerable and I'm naked, and it's like, ooh, things sting a little bit more.
Yeah. I'm feeling because, the addiction is a numbing agent. It's a numbing agent, and but it's a numbing agent that self-inflicts even more pain.
Oh yeah,
It just doesn't feel like it in the moment. You don't realize it's building and building. And you see, I have a little bit of a different way with it not being ripped out. It's the integration so that this thing isn't inflamed anymore, and you understand more what fear is, what your nervous system is. It's recognizing that, when you are separated from self, you're going to find everything on the outside to bring you back into that connection, into that worth. And so to feel like it got removed, if it ever comes to visit again, it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Where I'm sure you've had glimpses where these sensations or feelings have come to visit, and it's like, oh, that's okay. I know who you are, yet you're not allowed to hijack me anymore.
right.
And I'm not going to
Just
deny my past.
yeah.
It's going to strengthen me because I'm not going to be in shame of trying to hide what my experiences were. Yet when you come to visit, you don't get to do a muck anymore.
Well, and what, literally looping back to what you said earlier, the power of choice, that's one of the beauties of what happens in recovery, that happens nowadays, and is what you just described, which is, yeah, I get triggered, I get stressed, and sometimes I make a bad choice. Before, when that would happen, it would be like I would make a bad choice, and then it was like instantly I'm careening down this mudslide, and it felt like I couldn't stop. I was just going to make a bunch more bad choices. And now it's like, okay, I made a bad choice, or I'm triggered, or I'm stressed. I could make more of these if I want to, but do I want that? Do I want these consequences? And like, I mean, there's times where me and my wife, and this is going to sound wild, like, because I've jumped into recovery for sexual addiction. She's jumped into recovery for betrayal trauma. By God's grace, we have experienced so much healing and transformation, not to get back to pre-betrayal, but to be something completely different and completely
Yeah,
new.
you've transformed.
Right.
You've
And
transmuted and transformed.
so like there's times where we talk and maybe I'm something happened and I'm feeling a little butthurt and I kind of want to wallow in it. And I might look over and chuckle and be like, all right, I think I'm gonna be in victim stance for about 10 seconds. And it's like it's kind of, on one hand it's an inside joke, but it's also like, I'm gonna give myself permission to throw a fit internally for a couple seconds, and then I'm gonna correct it. And it's like this goofy little thing, but it's like I didn't feel like I had the choice before to turn that off. Right? Is like if I started wallowing in victim stance, if I started wallowing in you know we call corrosion and cutoff, and just going through and compartmentalizing on steroids and siloing my emotions. Once I started on that train, I couldn't stop that thing. It felt like I couldn't stop that thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that it's good to, throw an inner temper tantrum for even 5 seconds necessarily, but to be able to go, okay, like, yeah, that's happening right now. I'm being immature. Okay, let me go ahead and stop that.
Mm-hmm.
Like compared to what life used to be like, it feels like there's a superpower, just because I seemingly had no freedom of choice, even though, as we keep talking about, I did, but I felt like I couldn't slow life down enough to recognize it.
You didn't know you could feel.
Yeah.
It's the missing word that we all, when people are like, what is this thing that you're talking about? And it's feeling. You had to feel to be able to listen to what the emotions were and not just get stuck in your patterns. The default of anger, the default of addiction, those are easy to access. To really feel our authentic emotions and slow things down and feel our vulnerability, ooh, doesn't feel too good. I want to bring you into a reflective question. I want to ask you to bring your awareness right now and go back to your 18-year-old self. And you have 3 words you can tell your 18-year-old self to carry you to the journey of right now. What would those 3 words be?
That's a heck of a challenge. This is where I want to give the perfect answer. It's like I
Just
want to
talk from the
figure out.
heart.
I mean, the word that always, like, if you see my Instagram, if you listen to my podcast, that the word usually on the second half of the interviews, the word that's going to scream at you, that is like the heartbeat in me and my recovery work and trying to speak, is hope. So maybe the 3 words would be, there is hope. Because I I mean, when I was 18, I wasn't hopeless. When I was 19, I wasn't hopeless. When I was married and had cheated on my wife, I don't think I was hopeless yet. I was starting to get scared. When I was 22, 23 years old, I've been married for 2, 3 years. I've got kids. I'm still cheating on my wife, looking at porn all the time, flirting with every woman, hurting. I can't stop. I feel like I can't stop. I was hopeless. Um, there's some examples floating in my head, and I won't, unless you want me to. I won't share them because I don't want to be triggering. But in terms of what that hopelessness looks like, I remember that hopelessness
Mm-hmm.
of just wishing so much. Like, God, why did you put me on this earth? Like, I wish you would have never created me, because then Carrie can have somebody else for a husband. These boys can have somebody else for a dad.
Mm-hmm.
There was no way that I could ever have a life free from the destruction that I was causing, let alone an actually like enjoyable, fulfilling life where I'm like doing work out in the world, helping others. Um, I, I didn't think that was possible. So to know that there is hope, that if I only have 3 words, that's probably the 3 that I would give.
They're very powerful ones. Very powerful ones. Now, I know the listeners are like, okay, where can I find Logan? So, can you let the listeners know where they can find you and what you have to offer?
Yeah. So this is pretty skinny. I do this as a ministry purely. This is not my job. I don't get paid from this. So all of my work is on podcasts on Instagram. No longer in bondage is my handle. So at no period longer period in period bondage. I think if you actually just search those words, that'll be the first to come up though. And I put a lot of stuff out there to bring awareness to sexual addiction, sexual addiction recovery, betrayal trauma, and this is not going to be B-roll of waves hitting the beach with like a motivational phrase that I got off Chat GPT. This is me talking about my story, me talking about stuff, real life stuff, tangible recovery tools. I mean, if any part of this has been helpful or insightful, please check out the Instagram. I think you'll appreciate that. And a lot of clips, powerful clips from lots of different interviews. That's a lot of the content as well. And I will say I've never had anything to like dangle out there before, because I haven't written a book. I don't have a course that I'm selling. I was able to take part in a really awesome recovery summit, Blessed Family Recovery. I've got like a link that I can send you. I think if you DM me or if you comment on one of my posts saying, hey, talking about the summit, something like that, mention the summit, I can get you a link. Everyone that took part in the summit has a chance to give a free something. And since I don't sell courses or anything, I was kind of at a loss. But what I did was I set up two separate there'll be a group Zoom. And so I'm gonna on two different dates. If somebody wants to join, that's something they can do for free. And it'll be a time for Q&A. I'll share a little bit of my story, but mostly it'll be ideally a Q&A where we can just talk live time about this. People have questions about how they can proceed, in their own lives. So that's something that I would offer up to your listeners. If hit me up on Instagram and I can get you whatever you need to join in on that.
Okay. That'll be all in the show notes, so you're able to click and get to Logan right away. And like he said, just DM him or on his posts, write Summit, and he'll be able to send you the link in the information. I want to thank you, Logan, for doing the alchemy in your life. You've taken the impurities and you've turned them into gold, yet you haven't kept the gold for yourself. You're sharing it with others. So thank you for doing that alchemy in your personal life and sharing it out with others so that they can be empowered in seeing that there's light within the darkness. And, at any time, anyone that was listening, if there was an aha moment or you felt like you heard your story within Logan's, reach out to him. That's your limbic system giving you a signal that there's something there that you can relate to. So reach out to him and get in connection with him. Is there anything that you would like to leave the listeners that's in your heart that you think might, help anybody in their journey or in their recovery?
Sure. Really just to piggyback on what you just said, I promise you, this is a powerful promise that I'm making, but I mean it. There is no pain, whether it's self-inflicted or it's a trauma that you have experienced on someone else's hand. There is no pain that you can experience or have experienced that, number one, there is not healing from. Doesn't mean that it's going to be an easy or linear path. I'm sure it probably will not be. But number two, that somebody else has not experienced. We all have unique traits and we all have things that separate us and make people different. And that's a beautiful thing. That can be a beautiful thing. But there are so many common denominators. I mean, and the amount of people that, whether they hear my story and they go, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that other people had done X, Y, Z. Guys that I work with, that have powerful stories that guys that have, they've done things or they've experienced things or they've been hurt in ways that I have not, but there's other guys that have. And so just please do not there's a thinking error of uniqueness that we talk about in recovery. And that can manifest in lots of different ways. But the way it manifests here would be, I'm the only one that suffered this trauma, or I'm the only one that suffers in this way. I'm the only one that has hurt people in this way. So therefore, why reach out? Because I'm gonna look like a weirdo, I'm gonna look like a freak, I'm gonna be embarrassed, shamed, all these things. I promise you, there are other people that are feeling the same way about the exact same thing. Do not let it be a reason not to reach out, whether it be to myself or maybe somebody else who's better suited, depending on what it is that's your story.
You heard him. Don't suffer alone. There's people that are willing to witness your pain and show you the greatness within yourself. So again, if at any time there was an opening within yourself that, you were curious about Logan, reach out to him. His information will be in the show notes, so you're able to click in and get in contact with him. I want to thank you, Logan, for sharing your story, sharing your experiences, and being very transparent. I really appreciate you being here on the podcast and enriching the lives of the listeners. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome, and thank you for the opportunity of having me on it. I thank God for the opportunity to give back, to be able to talk with people and just spread the light that, hey, there's a way out of the cave.
Yeah. Please remember to be kind to yourself.
Hey, you made it all the way here. I appreciate you and your time. If you found value in this conversation, please share it out. If there was somebody that popped into your mind, take action and share it out with them. It possibly may not be them that will benefit. It's that they know somebody that will benefit from listening to this conversation. So please take action and share out the podcast. You can find us on social media, on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok under Lift Oneself. And if you want to inquire about the work that I do and the services that I provide to people, come over on my website, come into a discovery call, liftoneself.com. Until next time, please remember to be kind and gentle with yourself. You matter.